Here's what a day in the emergency room has taught me about leadership. On December 28th, 2021, I went to check the mail, slipped on the ice, and broke my wrist. So what does a broken wrist, a day in the emergency room, and a series of emergency room staff comments have to do with leadership? Let me tie this together for you. By the time I entered the emergency unit, I was so much in pain, I could hardly speak. So they sat me in a wheelchair, and pretty soon after that, a young man started to take my blood pressure. And he said something like, "Well, you are not the first today, and you won't be the last." And I guess he was referring to the icy weather or something and the number of broken bones from all over the city that day. But all I could say was, that doesn't help me much right now. And so next, what they did was they sat me in the drafty waiting room area where I had to wait for the triage. And I sat there whimpering and having, to deal with the pain. So finally, a young woman comes and starts pushing my wheelchair towards the triage room away from the waiting area. And I heard her say, "I'm so sorry that this is happening to you, darling." Ah, this landed in my heart, and I did feel cared for. Some human connection after all. And I did love that she called me darling. It sounded like some intimacy in this very sterile environment. And later, after I'd been given some heavy drugs to sedate the pain, the orthopedist comes and explains what has to happen next. So by then, my swollen wrist is looking like a funny, twisted balloon, and it needs to have the bones repositioned. And in order to numb the pain locally, she pulls a syringe with a long needle and sticks it in my wrist. I mean, really pumping the local anesthetic into the gap of the broken bones. So this happens very fast. And as she did that, I became convinced that my already swollen wrist would explode. So I was about to panic big time. And that was exactly the moment when she said, "You probably are feeling that your wrist is about to explode. It won't." That's it. That's all she said. And it did the magic. The panic stopped and the tension was gone. So, you're not the first one and you won't be the last. I'm so sorry that this is happening to you, darling. You are probably feeling that your wrist is about to explode. These were the three things I heard at different times from three different staff members. The situation was so unique because I was so incredibly vulnerable and very hyper aware of how certain words affected me or not. So the first comment really irritated me. It was quite unhelpful to me. And it seemed like the young man was telling me that I was just one of many and he was kind of comparing me. I'm not saying that that's what he intended, but that's how it landed with me. So the second comment seemed really to come from care and from the heart. And I really did feel the presence of another human being. And that was great. Definitely a good experience for me, since she was expressing an awareness of the state that I was in. And at the same time, it somehow seemed to say kind of as much about her as it did about me. And the third one, as factual as it was, really nailed it. I mean, why is that? The orthopedist, Tara was her name, verbalized my experience, my immediate experience. And when Tara named specifically what I was experiencing, what I was going through at that very moment, everything shifted for me. She remembered to be present to what I was going through. And she seemed to care enough to make that experience very explicit, and her behavior expressed that I see you. And I did feel seen by her at that moment. She didn't have to change anything for me. She didn't have to take the needle out of my wrist to relieve me. She only needed to be present to what was happening for me. So at that moment, she needed only to care enough to speak that experience out loud. That's it. No comparing, not trying to change anything, not normalizing, nothing. So I'll stop here. And in the next episode, I will share with you what this experience has to do with leadership effectiveness and how empathy can be practiced by you in a very practical, everyday way.